He thought he'd found the love of his life. Young, beautiful, full of promise. A second chance at happiness that most men his age only dream about. Robert Gaines, 52 years old, stood at that beach altar 7 days ago with a woman he believed was 20 years old, feeling like the luckiest man in Florida. But tonight, police lights are flashing outside his rental home, and his bride is lying on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood, stabbed 8 times. Because Robert discovered something that shattered his entire world. Sierra wasn't 20. She was 45, older than the wife he'd just abandoned. And in that moment of discovery, something inside him broke beyond repair. How does a fairy tale romance turn into a murder scene in just 1 week? What kind of lie could drive someone to kill the person they just promised to love forever? And in a world where anyone can be anyone online, how do we know who we're really falling in love with? Welcome to Silent Witness, True Crime Stories. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe, and also download your free ebook by clicking the link in the pinned comment. Because the truth behind this marriage is something no one saw coming. This is the story of Robert Gaines, a real estate agent from Fort Myers, Florida, a man who spent his 50s chasing youth like it was the last train leaving the station. Divorced twice, gym membership never expired, always the oldest guy at the beach bar buying rounds for people half his age. And then there was Sierra, the mysterious young woman he met on a dating app, with her filtered photos and carefully crafted messages that made him feel 25 again. They were married within 6 weeks. His friends thought he was crazy. His ex-wife thought he was pathetic. But Robert thought he'd beaten the system, found something real in a world of fakes. Until he discovered that Sierra had been lying about everything, starting with the one thing that mattered most to him: her age. And when that truth came out, it triggered a chain of events that would end in bloodshed, police manhunts, and questions that still haunt everyone who knew them. Who was Sierra really? What secret was she hiding behind those filtered selfies? And why did Robert lose control so completely when he found out? Stay with me, because this case will make you question everything you think you know about online dating, midlife crisis, and how far people will go to protect their pride. Robert Gaines wasn't always the kind of man who would end up in a story like this. Born and raised in Tampa, he'd built a decent life for himself selling vacation properties to snowbirds and retirees. 2 marriages, 3 kids from the first one, a mortgage he could handle, and a reputation around town as a smooth talker who could sell ice to an Eskimo. But somewhere around his 48th birthday, something shifted. His second wife, Linda, said she noticed it first. The gym memberships got more intense, the clothes got younger, the conversations at dinner became less about their future and more about his past, about the things he felt like he'd missed out on. Robert started talking about feeling invisible, about how women looked right through him like he was furniture. Linda tried to understand, tried to be supportive, but eventually she realized she was married to a man who was fighting a war against time that he could never win. After 18 years together, Robert left. No big fight, no affair that Linda knew about, just a quiet conversation where he told her he needed to feel alive again. She signed the papers 6 months later. Robert moved into a rental condo near Fort Myers Beach, the kind of place where young people partied on weekends and spring breakers left their empties on the sand. He was 51, newly single, and determined to prove that his best years weren't behind him. His buddies from work said he was going through something, that he'd settle down eventually, but Robert had other plans. He joined dating apps, all of them. Swiped right more than left. Went on dates with women in their 30s, their 20s, anyone who made him feel like he still had it. Most of them ghosted him after 1 drink. Some were polite about it. Others just stopped responding. And then, in March of last year, he matched with Sierra. Her profile said she was 20 years old, a college student studying hospitality management, new to Florida, and looking to meet people. Her photos showed a young woman with long, dark hair, bright eyes, and a smile that seemed genuine in a sea of obvious fakes. Robert was hooked immediately. They messaged for 3 days straight, long conversations about dreams and futures, and all the things Robert had stopped talking about with Linda years ago. Sierra told him she'd been through a tough breakup, that she was tired of guys her own age who didn't know what they wanted. She said she liked older men because they were stable, confident, knew how to treat a woman right. Everything Robert needed to hear, she said. When they finally met in person at a beachside restaurant, Robert said later that he felt like he'd been hit by lightning. Sierra was beautiful, sure, but it was more than that. She listened. She laughed at his jokes. She touched his arm when she talked and looked at him like he was the most interesting person in the room. She was everything his ex-wives hadn't been, everything the women his own age had stopped being. Or at least, that's what Robert told himself. His friends met her a week later and had questions immediately. Something about her didn't add up. The way she talked, the references she made, the fact that she seemed uncomfortable when other young people were around. One buddy pulled Robert aside and said, "Man, are you sure about her age? She looks older in person." Robert laughed it off, called him jealous, said people always doubt you when you've got something good. He proposed after 5 weeks. Sierra said yes. They were married at a small beach ceremony on a Thursday afternoon in late April, just the two of them, and a courthouse official who pronounced them husband and wife while seagulls screamed overhead. Robert posted the photos on social media with the caption, "Finally found my forever." His ex-wife saw it and didn't comment. His kids didn't either, but Robert didn't care. He'd won. He'd beaten the clock, found love again, proved that age was just a number. The first crack appeared on day 4 of the marriage. Robert and Sierra were at a restaurant in downtown Fort Myers, celebrating what Robert kept calling their mini honeymoon, even though they'd never left town. A waiter who'd gone to high school in the area did a double take when he saw Sierra, walked over with a confused smile and said, Monica Latham? Is that you?" Sierra went pale. She stammered something about him having her confused with someone else, grabbed Robert's hand and said she wasn't feeling well, they needed to leave. Robert paid the bill and followed her out, asking what that was about. She told him the guy was mistaken, that she got that all the time, people thinking she was someone else. But Robert saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. Fear. He let it go that night, but the name stuck in his head. Monica Latham. The next morning, while Sierra was in the shower, Robert did what any suspicious husband would do. He Googled the name, and what he found made his stomach drop. Monica Latham, age 45, former resident of Panama City, Florida. Divorced, bankruptcy filing from 3 years ago, a Facebook profile that had been deactivated but was still cached in search results. And in those cached photos, he saw her. His wife. Older, without the filters, but unmistakably the same person. She wasn't 20. She wasn't even 30. She was 45 years old, 3 years older than Linda, the wife he'd left because he wanted something younger, something fresh, something that made him feel alive. Robert sat there staring at his phone screen, his hands shaking, his whole world collapsing in real time. Everything had been a lie. The age, probably the name, maybe even the stories about college and starting over. He'd left his marriage, alienated his kids, made himself a joke to his friends, all for a woman who'd catfished him in the cruelest way possible. When Sierra came out of the bathroom, Robert was still sitting there, phone in hand. She saw his face and knew immediately. The conversation that followed, neighbors would later tell police, was loud enough to hear through the walls. Screaming, crying, accusations flying back and forth. Sierra apparently admitted everything, said she'd lied because she was lonely, because men her age ignored her, because she wanted to feel desired again. Said she'd fallen for Robert, that the feelings were real even if the details weren't. Said she was going to tell him, she just needed time. Robert didn't want to hear it. According to what investigators later pieced together, he told her to pack her things and get out, that the marriage was over, that he'd have it annulled by the end of the week. Sierra begged him to listen, to understand, to give her a chance to explain. She reminded him that he'd fallen for who she was, not just her age, that what they had was real. But Robert was beyond reason. In his mind, she'd made him a fool, and everyone would know it. His ex-wife would know. His kids would know. His buddies would know. The whole town would be laughing at the old guy who got played by a woman his own age pretending to be young. That night, May 2nd, the neighbors heard the screaming start again around 9 p.m. Then, around 10:15, everything went quiet. One neighbor told police she thought about checking on them, but didn't want to intrude on what sounded like a marital dispute. Another said he heard a car start up around 11 and saw Robert's Honda Accord pull out of the driveway fast, tires squealing. When police arrived the next morning after a wellness check requested by Sierra's sister, they found the front door unlocked. Inside, the scene told a story of rage that had boiled over into violence. Sierra, whose real name was Monica Latham, was lying on the kitchen floor near the refrigerator, stabbed 8 times in the chest and abdomen. The knife, a large kitchen blade from the block on the counter, was on the floor next to her body. There were signs of a struggle: overturned chairs, broken glass, blood spatter on the walls, and Robert was gone. His phone turned off, his car missing, and every minute that passed making the manhunt more urgent. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. The Fort Myers Police Department issued a BOLO for Robert Gaines within hours, and by that afternoon, his face was on every local news channel in Southwest Florida. Florida man wanted for murder of new bride. The case had everything the media loved: a whirlwind romance, a shocking age gap that turned out to be fake, a deadly confrontation, and a manhunt across the state. Robert's ex-wife Linda spoke to reporters from her front porch, her voice shaking. She said she wasn't surprised, that Robert had been unraveling for years, that his obsession with staying young had poisoned everything good in his life. She said she felt sorry for Monica, that no one deserved what happened to her, but she also said she'd tried to warn Robert that chasing youth was going to destroy him. His kids refused to comment. His co-workers at the real estate office said they'd seen him the day before Monica's death, and he'd seemed off, distracted, angry about something he wouldn't discuss. One agent said Robert had mentioned that his marriage wasn't what he thought it would be, but no one imagined it would end like this. Detectives started building their timeline, interviewing friends, pulling phone records, checking surveillance cameras at every gas station and traffic light between Fort Myers and the state line. They found Robert's last credit card transaction at a Wawa just outside Naples at 11:47 p.m. on the night of the murder, just a bottle of water and a pack of cigarettes. After that, nothing. No more charges, no more pings off cell towers, no sightings that could be confirmed. It was like he'd vanished into the Florida night. But tips started pouring in anyway, the usual chaos that follows any manhunt. Someone claimed they saw Robert at a rest stop near Tampa. Another said they'd spotted him getting on a bus to Atlanta. A woman called in saying her ex-husband looked just like the guy on TV, and she was sure it was him, even though her ex-husband had been dead for 2 years. Police chased every lead, set up roadblocks, checked motels, canvassed truck stops. Nothing. Meanwhile, the investigation into Monica's life revealed its own layers of deception. She wasn't just lying about her age. Her real name was Angela Morris, and she'd been using Monica Latham as an alias for nearly 4 years after a bankruptcy and a messy divorce left her desperate to start over. Angela had worked as a hairstylist in Alabama before moving to Florida, where she'd apparently reinvented herself online, using filters and old photos to create a younger version of herself. Friends from her past told detectives that Angela had always been insecure about aging, that she'd talked about wanting to feel beautiful again, desired again. One former coworker said Angela had joked about catfishing men online, but everyone thought she was kidding. Apparently, she wasn't. Detectives also discovered that Robert and Angela's relationship had moved fast because they'd both been hiding things. Robert never told her about his financial troubles, the credit card debt, the child support he was behind on. Angela never told him that she'd done this before, that there had been at least 2 other men she'd met online using fake ages, relationships that ended when the truth came out. They were 2 people running from their real lives, and when those lives caught up with them, the collision was fatal. By day 5 of the manhunt, police were starting to consider the possibility that Robert had killed himself, maybe driven into the Everglades or the Gulf and disappeared. Divers were called in to search canals near where his car was last seen. Dogs tracked his scent into a wooded area but lost it near a creek. The media started speculating. Some talk shows debated whether Robert was a monster or a victim himself, manipulated and humiliated beyond what any person could bear. Others argued that nothing justified murder, that plenty of people get lied to and don't pick up a knife. The debates raged on social media, strangers taking sides in a tragedy they'd never be able to fully understand. And then, on day 12, a fisherman in the small town of Everglades City saw something floating near a boat ramp. He called it in, and police pulled Robert's Honda Accord out of a shallow canal, the driver's side door open, water flooding the interior. Inside, they found Robert's body slumped over the steering wheel, a suicide note on the passenger seat, and wedding photos scattered across the dashboard. The note was short, just a few lines scrawled on the back of a gas station receipt. "She made a fool of me. I gave up everything. I can't live with what I did. I'm sorry. Investigators ruled it a murder-suicide. Case closed. Tragedy complete. 2 lives destroyed over lies and pride and the desperate human need to be something we're not." But the story didn't end there, because as detectives dug deeper into Angela Morris's past, they discovered something that changed the entire narrative. Angela hadn't just lied about her age to Robert. She'd stolen someone else's identity years earlier. The real Monica Latham was a woman from Pensacola who'd had her identity stolen in a data breach back in 2019. Angela had somehow obtained her information, social security number, date of birth, and had been using it to open credit cards, apply for apartments, and apparently create online dating profiles. The real Monica Latham didn't even know her name had been used until police contacted her after Angela's death. She told investigators she'd never heard of Angela Morris or Robert Gaines, that she was happily married with 2 kids, and had no idea someone had been living a second life under her name. This revelation opened up a whole new investigation. How many other people had Angela deceived? How many other relationships had she built on lies? Detectives found records of at least 3 other men she'd been involved with over the past 5 years, all of them older, all of them believing she was significantly younger than she really was. One man from Jacksonville said he'd dated her for 4 months before she disappeared without explanation. He'd known her as Sarah, age 26. Another man from Tallahassee said she'd borrowed $5,000 from him and vanished. He'd known her as Jessica, age 28. None of them had any idea who she really was. Angela had been running this con for years, moving from city to city, relationship to relationship, always staying just ahead of the consequences. But this time, she'd chosen the wrong man. Robert's friend, a guy named Danny, who'd helped him move into the rental condo after his divorce, came forward with information that made the case even more complicated. Danny told police that Robert had called him on the night of the murder, around 10 p.m., hysterical and barely making sense. Robert had apparently told him everything, about the lies, about the confrontation, about how he'd lost control, and now Monica was dead. Danny said he told Robert to call the police, to turn himself in, but Robert refused. He said he couldn't face the humiliation, couldn't let everyone know he'd been fooled, couldn't spend the rest of his life in prison for killing someone who'd destroyed his entire world with lies. Danny admitted he should have called the police himself, but he didn't. He thought Robert just needed time to cool off, that maybe he was exaggerating, that it couldn't be as bad as it sounded. By the time Danny realized Robert was serious, it was too late. The most chilling detail came from the forensics team. The medical examiner determined that Angela had lived for several minutes after the initial attack, long enough to crawl toward the phone on the kitchen counter, leaving a trail of blood across the tile floor. She'd almost reached it before she died. If she'd made it, if she'd been able to call for help, she might have survived. Robert would have been caught immediately. But she didn't make it, and Robert had 12 days to run before the guilt and the fear finally caught up with him in that canal. The wedding photos found in Robert's car told their own story. In one, they're both smiling, genuinely happy, standing in front of the beach with the sunset behind them. In another, Robert's kissing Angela's cheek while she laughs. These weren't the photos of two people playing roles. They were the photos of two people who, for a brief moment, believed they'd found something real. And maybe they had. Maybe underneath all the lies and the desperation and the fake profiles, there was something genuine between them. But it wasn't enough to survive the truth. 6 months after the murder-suicide, investigators from the FBI's Identity Theft Division contacted Fort Myers police with new information. They'd been tracking a sophisticated identity theft ring operating across the Southeast, and Angela Morris's name had come up in their investigation. It turned out Angela hadn't been working alone. She was part of a loose network of women who shared tips online about how to create fake identities, how to use photo filters convincingly, how to target lonely middle-aged men and extract money or gifts before disappearing. The FBI had been monitoring forums and private chat groups where these women traded advice and bragged about their scores. Angela had been an active member under multiple usernames, posting photos of herself with Robert just days before her death, calling him her retirement plan. Other members had warned her that she was playing a dangerous game, that eventually she'd meet someone who wouldn't just walk away when the truth came out. She'd responded with laughing emojis. Reading through these chat logs, investigators realized that Angela had known exactly what she was doing. This wasn't a lonely woman making a desperate mistake. This was calculated, methodical deception aimed at exploiting vulnerable men for financial gain and emotional validation. She'd targeted Robert specifically because his social media showed he was recently divorced, financially comfortable, and posting gym selfies with captions about starting over. She'd built her Sierra persona to be exactly what he needed, and it had worked perfectly until the waiter at that restaurant recognized her. But here's where the story gets even more complicated, because investigators also found Robert's search history from the weeks before he met Angela. He'd been on forums too, sites where men discuss strategies for dating younger women, how to present yourself as successful and youthful, how to spot gold diggers and avoid women your own age. Robert had been playing his own game, crafting his own persona, lying about his debt and his relationship with his kids to seem more attractive. The truth is, they were both con artists in their own way, both running from who they really were, both desperate to be seen as something they weren't. When their lies collided, when the carefully constructed fantasies fell apart, neither of them knew how to handle the reality underneath. Robert's ex-wife Linda agreed to one final interview after the FBI's findings went public. She sat in her living room, the same house she'd shared with Robert for 18 years, and said something that stuck with everyone who heard it. She said, "Robert didn't die because Angela lied to him. He died because he couldn't forgive himself for being fooled. He spent years trying to prove he was still young, still desirable, still winning at life. And when he realized he'd been chasing a fantasy, when he saw that he was just a middle-aged man who'd fallen for the same tricks he'd been trying to use himself, he couldn't handle it. His pride killed them both." The final piece of evidence came from Robert's suicide note, the full version that police hadn't released to the public. After the line about being made a fool, Robert had written something else. He'd written, "I saw myself in her. We were the same, and I hated us both for it." In the end, this wasn't really a story about catfishing or age gaps or even murder. It was a story about two people who'd spent so long pretending to be someone else that they'd forgotten how to be real. And when reality finally forced its way in, the only thing left was rage and regret, and the terrible finality of violence. Angela Morris died on a kitchen floor, reaching for a phone she'd never get to. Robert Gaines died in a submerged car, surrounded by photos of a happiness that was never as real as he'd needed it to be. And somewhere in between those two deaths is a question we all need to answer. How far will we go to avoid being who we really are? And what happens when the masks finally come off? So here's what I want to ask you. Was Robert pushed beyond what any person could reasonably handle? Or was this violence something that was always inside him, just waiting for the right trigger? Could you imagine discovering that your partner had been lying about something so fundamental, so basic, that it made you question every moment you'd shared together? And if you found out tomorrow that someone you loved had been living a completely fabricated life, how would you react? Would you walk away, or would something darker take over? Angela made choices that directly led to her death. There's no question about that. But does lying about your age make you deserve to be murdered? Does catfishing someone justify stabbing them 8 times while they crawl across the floor trying to call for help? Or was this about something deeper, about a culture that tells men their value decreases with age unless they can land a younger woman, and tells women they become invisible after 40 unless they lie about who they are? Let us know in the comments what you think happened in those final moments. Was Robert acting out of rage, out of humiliation, out of some desperate need to punish Angela for holding up a mirror to his own lies? Or was there something else going on, something we'll never fully understand, because both people who knew the truth are dead? And here's the thing that should scare all of us. This story isn't unique. Right now, there are thousands of people online creating fake versions of themselves, chasing fantasies, building relationships on foundations of lies. Most of those situations won't end in murder, but they all end in some kind of pain, some kind of reckoning when the truth eventually comes out. Because it always does. The question is, what we do when it arrives. If you thought this story was shocking, wait until you hear about the woman from Tampa who faked her own death to frame her husband for murder, only to have the whole plan unravel because of a single text message she forgot to delete. That story's coming up next, and trust me, it'll make you question everything you think you know about love, lies, and how far people will go to escape the lives they've built. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss these true crime stories that prove reality is always stranger and darker than fiction. Hit that notification bell, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and remember that behind every headline, there's a human story, messy and complicated and tragic in ways we can barely comprehend. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.